So, today in Tech Weeklies, first we have Ruslan talking about serverless server-side rendering for ReactJS apps. Please.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I would like to talk to you about Serverless, actually framework. There was on the last Tech Weeklies, there was a quite interesting talk about code build, code pipeline. How do you deploy the Lambda? And it was interesting, and it has actually inspired me to explore this into the situation we have right now on the project, and I would like to talk with you about that. How did it end up? So we have right now the project. I will not tell the name, like knowing day. So we have a fairly, I think, like very standard setup is a ReactJS Redux styled components. It's a requirement from our customers using the AWS platform, and we are deploying actually using the code build, code pipeline a lot. So, and the question is actually we have these 10 websites. So they have a similar structure. They have a different content. And how do you actually manage that if you deploy it like server-side rendering? So I was quite, frankly, I was against using the server-side rendering at all, because it's actually, obviously it's results in a very difficult infrastructure, because like we need to have 3 environments and 10 regional websites, and so it basically means that you have 30 different containers running in. You can use, like, for example, Elastic Beanstalk, or you can use, we are using in this project particular Fargate. So it basically means that we have these containers, at least 30 containers, and if there's like scaling issues, it actually might result that it will grow in the size, and it costs can be unpredictable or like go out of control. So, and it presents actually infrastructure, the security and cost questions. So it's how do you actually solve that? So when we started thinking about the server-side rendering, if we are just a little bit in production, quite possible that you know that. So basically, it doesn't really differ from the client-side rendering. You just you execute a part of your ReactJS code. I might possible a little bit like not so experienced on that, but my view of that and this is this way. You just create a component tree, file the roads based on the location, and after that you just export that component tree into the HTML to hand over it to the client side. So, and it's actually a good way into creating isomorphic applications, as now they are called universal ones. So that's a good thing in that point. So, and after we have considered that we should use the server-side rendering, there was a talk on the Twitter, so which says that basically the client-side rendering websites, it's okay, but the problem is that the Google search engine deprioritized them and indexes them not like on the first pass, but after quite some time. And it actually can be a problem for that particular project, because we would like to launch like as soon as possible and to be visible on the internet. And so we need a good first-class experience with Google Engine and Google Search, because the customer is like expects that there will be good relevant results on the Google Search. So that's kind of like one of the requirements. So we have decided we need to go server-side rendering. So how do we actually do that? Not deploying the static websites, but do the server-side rendering, but not like involving large cost on the infrastructure and complexity. So there is such thing as a serverless framework. It's kind of a little bit different from the AWS. It's not handles not only AWS infrastructure. You can deploy using that to different kind of infrastructure. But in this particular project, we are using it only for AWS. It's Node.js. The configuration for the basic Lambda function is very simpler. You need one YAML file and one handler function. And for the AWS, it uses the CloudFormation, which is like de facto standard for the description of the configuration on AWS. It have actually a lot of plugins, and the AWS plugins are pretty diverse in their functionality. So we actually, in this particular project, they can solve a lot of the things we are having right now. And you can, during this using the serverless framework, you can define some of the resources, additional resources on AWS. You don't need to use a CloudFormation by yourself. You just define these resources on your configuration, and after that, it just creates these resources just for you, like the simple snippets for that, and I will show you like a little bit later. So this serverless framework is actually like one command, just serverless deploy, and after that you have a working URL you can call for the APIs. Quite probably you tried that. It's very simple in use, but a little bit difficult. You need a little bit more than that for the website, because you need to host the static resources. You need to host the ReactJS application inside, so it's kind of like get complex. So there is additional plugins for that which will actually solve these problems. One is called serverless HTTP, one is called serverless Webpack. So you create the free configs for the Webpack, which handles the specific situations for the client side. So you can still have this completely client-side ReactJS application. And you have a specific two additional configs for the packets. One is server-side rendering, and one is serverless rendering. So you can actually have three environments to run your website: client, Express.js, like regular server-side rendering, and deploy it to the serverless, to the Lambda special config. But basically, it doesn't change too much on this configuration. If you have used the Express.js framework or Next.js or something, you have the same mapping for the URLs in code of the server-side rendering code. You don't do something specific. You're only using this particular serverless plugin to wrap the serverless side to wrap the HTTP server side in the serverless framework, because serverless AWS Lambdas are using the event-based mechanism inside, and this plugin for the serverless framework, it actually handles that inside. You don't need to do anything specific for that. Okay. So, but the problems of AWS is that actually, if you are creating website, the binary part of the serving the static side from the Lambda, it doesn't work so well, because it treats binary files not so correct. It's mangles the body. It modifies the body of these binary files. So one of the good solutions for that is actually host static files on S3 or CDN CloudFront, and after that, like, it works better and much faster. So So the best practice of that is actually you use Lambda only to serve the ReactJS code, HTML, not to serve the static files for that. Another problem which is specific for the websites is AP gateway URLs. So when you deploy that, you get the URL like this displayed here. It's actually very relative. They are containing this part named stage. For this example, it's a def. So you cannot like create roads inside of that. It actually like doesn't work like they usually like develop websites. We have absolute paths inside of the domains, right? But the serverless framework have a plugin for that, and it's actually pretty easy to use. You just declare it, you just copy paste some code and YAML, and after that it works. It creates a domain automatically for you, which wraps these API invocations into your domain name. So on this, using this, I've created this example applications, which is actually handles all that problems we can experience in that. So it deploys in the serverless. It automatically copies all created by the Webpack static resources to the S3 bucket for static resources. It changes all the URLs inside of the HTML for that, and it creates the custom domain. You can actually go and see this yourself right now. So you have all these benefits of the serverless. It's automatically scales when you need it. It doesn't work when you sleep. For example, it's good for the development environments. So you have it only when you need it. So you do not pay for example, right now for Fargate, we have it. So it's all works all the time, but we don't need it like at the night. So why should we just run it right now? So what else? And you can actually have, for example, this serverless offline plugin, which actually tries to emulate the serverless as much as possible. So you have all these instruments to run it locally and test your setup before you deploy. There's actually it's okay. I think it's okay for the small to medium popularity websites. Should be okay. But if you talk about the large amount of hits, it can be quite a problem, because we have this 1 million limit of the free invocations per month. So it's you can hit it quite fast. So there is actually some ideas of fixing that. Is the AWS have this Lambda at edge, which actually allows you to run small, very simple, fast lambdas, which you can use to redirect modern browsers to static client-side rendered web application. And if the Google bot hits your website, you can actually go to the server-side rendering only for that. So it can considerably cut the costs. You can. I haven't actually explored that. Quite possible you can integrate the pre-render EO or some other things which allows you to cache or show we actually already done this server-side rendered pages. And of course you can use a CloudFront distribution create for this S3 bucket, so it will be faster to serve this. So for the demo applications works fine. We are deploying using that on the development for the project right now. We will try to test it and to integrate it. I hope it will go into production this way. So it's kind of what's our status right now. Any questions?
Any questions? Whoa. No questions. Nobody. Everything's clear. Perttu is not clear.
One thing that piqued my interest in your pros and cons was the con that it just works. Care to elaborate?
So the idea, why should you at all bother with server-side rendering? So it's just client-side. It just works. Why should the Google indexer, in my opinion, and what they are using, Google Chrome 41 for this search and indexing, it's quite outdated. So the client-side rendering, it actually works. Why we should bother? But the problem is Googlebot, which is not not working properly in my opinion. And the other problem is previews in Twitter, in the web WhatsApp. When you share the link, this is a problem, right? We cannot share the client-side rendered application. So it just works for us, like for when you are using the browser. Why our other services cannot just do the same and do not bother this? The Henrik, which he said why we should like run this server-side rendering, he have a point. So why do you just update your infrastructure and accept that this in the 2018 it's time to be okay with client-side rendered applications. So that's the point.
Hello. Thanks, Ruslan. When you said that you can deploy to serverless, you can deploy to Lambda using serverless, will the HTTP event connection be handled for you, or do you have to still do it manually in AWS?
Yeah. When you deploy to AWS, serverless deploy command gives you direct to use URL which already HTTPS secured. So when you deploy, you just get the links like this one, like random one. But when you do the custom domain, it's right now a little bit like obscure right now because it creates custom domain not inside of the cloud front. It's somewhere else, but it's still secured automatically. So you cannot actually access this Lambda as HTTP. You can, but it automatically translates you to HTTP. So you don't need to solve that problem. It's solved for you entirely.
And is that URL being provided by the API gateway?
Yes, it's just randomly created, and custom domain it's you manage that. So it's kind of.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Are there any remote questions? If there are no more questions, let's give a big hand to Ruslan. So next up would be Fotis. Fotis will be talking about, what was it? CSS Grid running in production and everything is fine. So we'll see soon that. And yeah, so it seems like our recording is working, so I'll share the video afterwards for people who don't see it now.
Does Google Meet work on Firefox this week, or do I have to use Chrome again? Let's find out. No, I'll just use Chrome.
Does anybody know?
No, I'll just use Chrome. I literally have Chrome.
Use
already
Chrome,
up
yeah.
with that.
You'll save quite a lot of time if we count like how many people are following.
Yeah.
5 minutes equals 2 hours maybe. Yes, meeting cost calendar. Calculator.
Present to meeting. What do I present to meeting if I'm on Chrome, but I have my things on Firefox? I guess the screen. Yeah, okay, yeah. YOLO, let's see. Does that work? I am presenting to everyone. Am I presenting to everyone? I am presenting to everyone. Okay, cool. Right, hi. My name is Fotis. The title of this talk is We Use CSS Grid in Production, and it's fine. Read into that as you will. No, don't. I will explain. The original motivation for this talk was that about a month ago, you can't see it too well. We had a really nice PR review where we re-implemented, I'm on the FIBA team, we're implementing like a sports rankings thing. And we had a ranking that was not like a list, it was just some divs with some numbers on them. And like a month ago we fixed that, and it's actually a list that uses CSS Grid, and that's quite nice. And my dear coworker Christian was trolling me a little bit and saying, hey, yeah, we could also have done this with table. And like, I mean, I guess technically true. But I was pretty tired that day, and it's not really easy. I even say I'm really tired at the moment, and the thing I do when I'm tired is I can't really tell if you're trolling me, so I wrote a little bit about that, and I said, okay, this would be a talk, and some good laughs were had, and this was added to the CSV, so I guess now I'm presenting. Yes, quick question. How many of you are familiar with the grid syntax? Decent so-and-so something? Okay, right. I will go a little bit into that. I will not go into extreme detail, which might be a bit annoying, but we'll see how it goes. Basically, if you want a really quick grid, you do this. You do display grid, so it's a property on the, it's a value in the display property. You declare the columns. In this case, we say one column, one column, one column. You declare the rows, one row, one row, one row. The FR is not technically a CSS unit in the way that pixel or rem is, but it's a unit you can use in grid. And basically, it means take up an even space of the area that's left over. So that's a theme that comes up very often in grid, the idea that you have some fixed values that you know, like pixels, you know from the beginning. You can lay out pixels without knowing much about them. And there are other things that you would like to do to allocate dynamically. So for example, if you were to say, allocate these 200 pixels in this column and split the rest evenly. And this is how it does that. I do have a few different examples. Yes, it works. Okay, yes, so it says here the many phases of grid, and the reason is that grid is really not just one property, it's an entire suite of properties, and I really love it, but at the same time it's kind of intimidating when you start learning about it, that, oh, there's so many ways to do this damn thing. This is based on some code pens by Rachel Andrew, who's written a shit ton about this topic, and you'll see me quoting things from her throughout this talk. So the first case, we have a fixed width grid. The way you do fixed width grid, you just say display grid, and then you kind of just display the columns. So you say 100 pixels, 100 pixels, 100 pixels. That's why you get A, B, C. You will see I'm not specifying the rows, and that's the second thing you should know about grid. It has a lot of default behavior, which is really good for the 90% use case, and something you just change in the other 10%, or maybe it's like 80 and 20 or something. So you see, I'm not specifying the rows, but it knows that, yeah, people probably might not do that, and it knows that it just does them evenly. There's also grid gap, which is really nice. It just says, you know, add some space between these things of 1 rem in this case. You can use any values you want there. The second part is called equal spacing. In this case, you'll see I'm using this magical FR unit again. So essentially, it says, whatever the container is, take the space you have available, split it into however many parts, and allocate it to the children. And again, since I only specify 3 columns, the rest of them go in a row below. Something cool to mention is that Firefox has a super nice grid inspector. You go where it says grid, and you click on it, you see the grid, yes! And it's actually quite nice to make sense of where things get allocated, especially when you're relying on this kind of automatic behavior of grid. I use this a whole lot. Third thing, and this is one of the coolest things of grid, is named areas. So in grid, you can actually name the area. So you can say, where do I do it? I do it with a class in this case. So I see GAA, you will see. I just grid area A. I've just made those atomic classes. And then you go and you say, okay, how is this grid going to be laid out? And the syntax is perfect. We all know it. It's called ASCII art. That is the valid syntax. Like 10-year-old me would be really happy if he knew that ASCII art will one day be a valid CSS layout method. So in this case, yeah, you literally just have like A, B, C, and that's why you get A, B, C. And if you look at the inspector, which is really nice, again, in this case, it will tell you exactly that this is A, that's B, and that is C, and that is correct. Yes, the math checks out. The cool thing about it is that you can just redefine this normally as you redefine CSS properties with a media query, which means that like on a mobile, you can just say A, B, C. On a larger, you say A, B, C, or so on. You don't always have to do it. I only use named areas when the design has to be really like intentional and precise. And I rely on autoflow on the other ones. Speaking of autoflow, that's the third part. There's even more properties. These are just the ones I care to show you. Autoflow basically is this thing here. Actually, it might be called auto something else. I'm just calling it autoflow. I could be messing up the terminology here. Essentially, it says, here's what you're going to do for the templates. you're going to go between 200 pixels and one equal space of what is left over for the first column. The second is going to be fixed 200. The third one is going to be fixed 200, which means that if you were to take this and make the viewport any larger, I don't know if I can resize it. I can't, damn it. OK, you'll just have to take my word for it. Or if I zoom out, does that mean? Yes, OK, cool, yes. So you'll see in this case, those are fixed to 200. And then after that pass has been done by Grid, it says, OK, I have whatever many pixels minus 400. That space is going to be the first row. This is super important, I think, to understand, because I think it's where the magic of Grid lies. And I really like this thing about Grid. Like, it can be either fully automatic, it can be completely manual with names for it, or it can be this like semi-automatic mode where you like put some constraints or like solve a bit of a Sudoku and it does it. And sometimes intimidating, sometimes really nice. And there's even more. Yeah, this is again, the MDN docs are really good about this. This is the full syntax. If you've ever read like the specky kind of syntax thing, you'll see that there's so many options like repeat and shorthand properties. There's the grid shorthand, and there's the grid template columns, and there's a lot of stuff there. And that might seem a little bit intimidating, and you will not be wrong to think that. But I think the important part to understand is that just put display grid and try to see what the columns do. And you will know when you need to use one of these things. For example, if you have like text and you need the text to stay at a reasonable length, like 50 to 70 characters or something, there's a thing that allows you to do that. But you probably won't run into it on the first thing you try to implement. And I think increasingly it's more worthwhile to think about these things of Grid as kind of tuning levers, as things that you can like pull this one, push this button, do that thing, put a constraint there to actually get the layout that you want. And I think it really changed the way I looked at this API once I realized that. And more generally, a lot of these properties are actually slowly becoming more general. They're moving to a more general part of the CSS spec. So I posted that in the front-end flow yesterday, but the grid gap I showed you is now called gap, and you can use it in Flexbox on Firefox right now, and I think other browsers will be doing that. And at some point in the future, you'll even be able to like vertically center things in normal display block. And that came from Grid and Flexbox. That's quite nice. So when would you use that in production? I think the ideal situation for Grid in production, the thing I would love to see at some point would be full screen layout. Because you have those named areas, right? So like you could do something, oh shit, I don't have it here. Damn it. Okay, you could potentially do header, 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 left sidebar, content, right sidebar, footer, 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 and then it's gonna do that. I mean, it can do that right now. There is a problem though, and I think that's a very important one. Grid really likes to have flat markup. So Grid, as we saw earlier, it's a kind of display thing that acts on the container, not on the children, which means that it's only the immediate children of this thing that will become grid items. The children of these children will not be aligned to the grid, which is a bit of a problem if you care about having semantic HTML, because very often you will have to put a header and put a nav inside of that, and those might not align, which might be fine, but it might also not be fine. If it is not fine, please don't flatten your markup to do that. Like, just go with some other layout method until we get subgrid. Subgrid has been spec'd. It's coming soon, TM. But until that lands and you run into this problem, just don't use it full page layout. I would be using that in production if it was not for that issue, but like Flexbox does okay for that. You just nest a row and then you rest the columns. It's not as pretty, but it works. So, and that's another problem actually. Flexbox, for if you want to do 2D with Flexbox, which means like one direction nested in another direction, you need to nest things, right? Because you need to have that thing. But Grid really wants the markup to be flat, which means that if you want to fall back cleanly from Grid to a fake 2D Flexbox, it's not really possible, or I haven't found a way to do it. So yeah, full screen layout would be great. Ask me in a few months. In reality, I think it's also really good for smaller components. In particular, if you have something that needs to autoflow in 2 dimensions, fantastic use case. If you have some kind of intricate or more intentional layout, I also think it's a really good use case. And then you fall back to a simpler kind of thing. I'm going to show you 2 examples of these as soon as I have some water. Okay. Ooh, what happened here? Okay, yes. So one thing that can autoflow in 2D is a gallery, and that's my favorite thing. I also asked for the fronted flow a few weeks back, and people told me that the thing they've used JS often for is masonry. If you don't know masonry, it's this card-like layout that can go back, that can backtrack basically to fill the gaps in the layout. So you'll see that there's no gaps. Really popular a few years ago with Pinterest, I guess, being the first one to have it, or the popular one. My own photo blog does exactly this. It uses JS to do this, and I think I should go back at one day, maintain this website and change that. CSS Grid cannot do masonry, though. So you're thinking, okay, you just told me about masonry, you're telling me you can't do it. What the hell? You're not selling this thing. But bear with me a little bit. You can do something a bit like masonry, but not quite it. In fact, I think the spec almost explicitly says, yeah, we're not going to be implementing like a backtracking, bin packing, whatever it's called, layout. It's not doing that, but you can do pretty well with that. So this is production. You can see, because it's an actual URL, maybe. I don't know. This is our production right now. And we have this grid, and this is just laid out with CSS Grid. And you can see that basically as you go, the images scale fine. There's no gaps as well. Lazy loading, load. There's no gaps, it's fine. There is a bit of trickery here, which is that since we have the images ourselves and we do the layout, you know if an image is a portrait or a landscape. In fact, we're going a bit further with this. We don't even care about that. We just do portrait, portrait, landscape, portrait, portrait, landscape, and then once you shuffle this, it looks kind of randomized. It works. And that's the thing I like about this, though, that even if I had to implement this with Flexbox, it would take me a whole lot longer. Second cool thing about this, actually, let me show you the code first. I think that might be more interesting. Not this, but this. Yeah, you see sometimes you will do like saslint is not really happy, and it thinks I've misspelled that property. Saslint is wrong. But in this case, you'll see that this is the only thing that makes this work. I say grid template columns, repeat as many as you can fit on a column, basically, with a constraint that the size will be between 13 rem. 13 rem is something we looked at our side and say, okay, an image looks readable in this length, and 1 equal portion, and that's the thing you need. And you also need to do grid autoflow dense, which basically means that it will try to pack things. It doesn't pack things in the same way that masonry does, but again, if you've kept the heights consistent, it's the exact same thing, or the result at least. The only media query in this entire file is this one, which means that on a large enough screen that we know can probably accommodate larger images, just change that constraint and have larger images. But we're still not telling it have 4 columns, 3 columns, 2 columns. This thing would be impossible in our website, because our website, it has this left sidebar. Sometimes it has a right sidebar, and it has 2 different layout modes, an event layout and a tour layout, which means that we would have to write media queries for all those combinations, and media queries that are tied to the viewport, which means that whenever or if at some point any of those constraints changes, we're going to have to remember to go back and change that, and good luck with that. This thing keeps doing that, though. It just takes an idealized width, a target that it can hit, and it just rolls with it. So you see we have 3 here, become smaller, 2, but big ones. Then there's the 1 breakpoint, so it has smaller images, 3 images, because again, it can fit those 2 images. Like, good luck with all those media queries, right? And eventually it gets to 1 image. This is super laggy, though, because of the present. Yeah, 1. And it figures it out by itself that, oh, I can only fit 1 image. I don't need to tell it that. And people have been asking for like container queries for the longest time. Like, oh, I kind of wish this thing would scale based on its container. This is the closest I think I have seen to something that works. It's not container queries. That's not true. You're completely relying on the grid algorithm. But the cool thing is that, yes, it does scale based on the container it has and not on the viewport, which means I can take this gallery and put it in another layout, put it with a sidebar and so on, and I know that it's not going to break. And that's really important. Yes, and I don't know what the name for this is. I called it smoke and masonry initially. Fakesonry might be it. But yeah, media queries and some tuning parameters, and it works. Demos here. Okay. This is important. Bear with me. If you keep one thing, this thing. Grid autoflow is the thing that will challenge your assumptions about layout. Like, once you start using it, you kind of get hooked to try it. It doesn't always work, but there are those cases where like having this autoflow allows you to kind of relax a little bit, to just let the browser take over and be confident that it's going to work, it's going to be performant, and so on. We had a bit of trouble, especially when we were working with Christian on this idea that, okay, it just autoflows and you don't control it in a way. And this is my humble advice. It's a really good strategy. I will not be ashamed to say that it took me like 15 minutes to try and make a button that doesn't show the YouTube preview so I could do the thing without it, spoiling it. Anyway, that was not great. The second thing you can do is when you have an intricate or intentional layout. So you might say, okay, whatever, okay, I'll let the browser do this thing, sure. Sometimes you have something that you do want to lay out intentionally, like the full page layout we said, or a smaller component that you really want to keep some proportions. We have this like long-running feature that the client really likes. It's this news highlight. And the news highlight works as such. Is this the news highlight? Yeah. The news highlight is like a big image on the left. Big is in the like communications, big with bold. This image has to be big. Great. And the other two have to be proportional and so on and so forth. This is hot off the press. You will see the URL there is a PR URL because I literally just did it yesterday. In production right now, I'm going to show it to you on Chrome or on... yeah, let me show this to you on Chrome because there's something interesting. On Chrome, this is production. It uses Flexbox. It uses Flexbox in the way you would think, in that it's a row, this is a row, this is a column, this has some Flexbox scaling to be full, basically to fit the cell. It works okay. The code is not the nicest it could be, and that's really annoying. Another annoying thing is that 7 years later, we're still finding some Flexbox bugs. Sometimes, the best bug, right? Sometimes. When you refresh the page, it breaks. Did it break now? No. Come on, break a little bit. Yes, exactly. Chrome is deciding what the height of this thing is going to be. I don't know. If I scroll a little bit, it might decide it's going to be the other height. No. If I zoom out, nope. Okay, zoom back. Oh, what? No. Yes, not a good look. Yeah, I don't know. If you open the inspector, it works. No? Oh, that also happens sometimes. Okay, the more things you know. Anyway, cool, okay, and it's like an important thing to have. But height with Flexbox sometimes is still annoying. And I claim to know something about Flexbox. But anyhow, with grid, we would do it with my favorite method again, ASCII art. This is literally the grid code for this. Just say, if you're on mobile, A, B, C. If you're on something larger, A, B, C. And if you're on like something that can fit, A, B, A, C. And it works. And oh yeah, the unsung hero of all of these things, like maybe if you forget anything about grid, just remember that image object fit cover exists. It's really fantastic if you want things to just, flex and not break with, intrinsically placed objects. Yeah, I don't know what to say about this. Like this, I did this yesterday, and I was like, I can just delete the Flexbox code, and it's gonna work. You might say, okay, it's gonna work, but it's not widely supported. What the hell? I got you. So a quiz. Except Jarno, though, because he got it correctly yesterday. I was like, fuck. What is the support percentage for Flexbox? Can we have the hive mind a little bit? Give me a number. Don't top 98, okay. Any other takers?
95.
95? Okay, cool. What is the support percentage for grid? So give me a number. Like, what do you think when I tell you CSS Grid and you start panicking? What number?
5.
Can I use?
What?
5.
Can I use?
5. Any other takers?
I don't know anything about this.
I don't know anything about this percent. Great. What is the percentage for your side? I don't know. But I will tell you. First of all, did you know? Okay, Flexbox. 95. Whoever said 95, you win. I don't know. You win nothing, but yes. My respect. 95 and 94 prefix. You will also see here that it says all website data. Again, if you forget anything about Grid today, maybe this trick will be something to keep. On Can I Use, you can actually import your site's Google Analytics. And yeah, you know this whole like tracking thing that we send all our users' data to Google? At least you can use them to get something useful. That's nice. Sorry, it's been a tough week. Okay, so we see 95 globally, 93% for our website. This is our production website of the last 30 days. And now for Grid, 87. Wait, and our website is 89. It's actually higher than the average for our website. So I don't know, like 89, 93, 95. I think, and if something that Can I Use doesn't allow you to do, but I would love if it allowed you to do that, is to kind of do the Venn diagram of support. So like take what supports Flexbox and what supports Grid and see, okay, how do they overlap? My instinct here is that if something doesn't support Grid, well, if it doesn't support Flexbox, it doesn't support Grid. I'm pretty sure that's correct. But my instinct is that barring IE11, which I'll talk about in a bit, if it doesn't support Grid, it probably doesn't support Flexbox either. At which point, maybe the fallback is literally fallback to normal block flow with a decent max width and max height. Because like you get Opera Mini, and Opera Mini is also like always kind of along those lines. But also Opera Mini is like a mobile browser primarily, right? So how many columns would your Grid have anyway on a mobile browser? Like none of the ones we have do that. So, you know. Some more things on the fallbacks though. I think the history of the layout, or history, who am I to speak of history, but will give you a really nice roadmap for how you can fall back from Grid. You've got the normal block flow. If you put divs, they'll just be one below the other, or I don't know if they're handling other writing modes these days. I know Flexbox does. You've got table cells, by which I mean display table cell. I don't mean actually using a table. Please don't. You've got absolute positioning, unless it's a table, at which point you use a table. You've got floats and clears and some percentage widths. You will notice maybe that in all the presentations so far, I haven't used percentage widths for Grid, which is like the thing we've been doing layout for the past years because of these methods. Inline blocks, you've got multi-column layout, which is also a really nice method, and not many people know about that. You've got Flexbox and also like nested Flexbox, so to do like 2D stuff. And then you have Grid, and I would probably add subgrid at some point. So I think those are kind of almost tiers at how you can fall back, depending on what you're doing. As I said before, and I'll say it again, subgrid is not yet implemented, so please don't like mess up your markup just to have a grid or a Flexbox or whatever. It's probably not worth it. I also think a JS fallback is a complete non-starter. Like if it's low-powered, browsers that don't support Grid, then I don't see how shipping 100K of JS is going to help any of that. Just have a nice block flow. IE11 has a Grid implementation. Fun fact, IE11 was the initial implementation of Grid. Grid has been cooking for 7 years, so it's actually a pretty mature implementation at this point, or a spec. I know auto-prefixer kind of allows you to use the alt syntax. I would be very scared to do that, because that means you're maintaining two kind of similar but different implementations. And I don't know, like if you want to put effort into supporting a browser, go support UC browser, which at least is used by, 8% of the population or something. Just have a nice block flow for IE11, or you have time, I don't know. Who am I to say? So I think for me, like depending on what I'm doing, and especially if it's like a mobile browser, I think, yeah, block flow, sure. Just let those things stack on top of each other, throw a nice max width, and it's an image gallery at the end of the day, and people can click on it to see it in full screen. Like, do I need to stress about it? Yeah, I stressed a little bit about it, and I'll tell you about that in a second. Floats are also valid. I still find those really hard to reason about. It could be it could be a result of me not having used those maths when they were around. I kind of jumped into Flexbox when I was learning CSS. But yeah, sure, if you're confident with them, go for it. And Flexbox sometimes can also work. So in our gallery, we do use that, mostly because we have IE 11 as the requirement. Real quick, I can show you that if you have a feature query, which are not supported in IE 11, how glorious is that? So you do the inverse. You can use this really handy DevTools plugin called Features Query Manager to toggle the feature queries on and off. So this is what happens if you go with Flexbox. We have more media queries. It definitely doesn't win any design awards. Just yesterday, I thought of a way to do that without having gaps, and I might try that. It would just kill the vertical images a little bit. And it works. It's, again, if you look at the implementation code, like my comment up here kind of says, most of the code is just making sure that the order of declarations are overwritten correctly for the fallback, and 3 lines is the grid implementation, which, to be realistic, this whole thing is not that much. It's 70 lines with comments. So even with the fallback, it's fine. It's not a lot of code to write. This is what we do. We just fall back to flex wrap and display flex and some media queries basically to, I don't know if I have the media queries here. No, the media queries are actually within other classes, but yeah, and you do this kind of thing basically. So remember how grid acts on the container and then the children? You can kind of use these selectors to do the same thing. Still not super convinced, but it's there. And I think, in general, when you're thinking about fallbacks, it's quite important to think, what does it mean to fall back here? Do I want it to look the same? At which point, let it go. I don't think it will look the same. And that's kind of the point, because if things, if these new things only allowed us to do all things in a new way, then why bother? There's just a lot of churn. But sometimes, you can ask some more interesting questions, What does my design here? What's the spirit of our design here? How can we preserve that with a different view? And it's on the web anyway, so it's never going to look the same since there's so many devices. Huh? It's can we just treat does not support grid as another device? If I told you, hey, I got this special phone, it doesn't support grid. Yeah, okay, it's a different device, I suppose. I don't know. Summarize. Grid is a collection of tuning levers to be intentional about layout. It's also a lot of properties, yes, but I think if you think of it this way, it's way nicer. It's widely supported, 89%, and it can actually help even in mid-sized components that you need to autoflow or to be intentional about. And page layout is really good. If you can, if you know that your browser support is there, go for it. I think you'll be pretty happy. And for fallbacks, again, I think kind of decide what fallback means to you. For me, block flow and a sensible max width is fine. And if I zoom out a bit more, no? Okay. Yeah, and I really like Flexbox if the nesting is not too annoying. Some quick credits. Again, as I said, Ray Salandru has written so much stuff on this. Gridbyexample.com. There is a fantastic article on smashing book 6, which I have here, and I'll be adding to the photo library in a bit, called Production-Ready CSS Grid Layouts, and it's just 50 pages, and it's all you would need to know about fallbacks, and it's really good. And yeah, if you feel like using grid in your project, then come find me, and I'll be happy to walk you through it, because I think it's really nice, actually, and it does challenge many of our assumptions about layout. My name is Fotis. Thank you very much.
Cool. Questions? Just shoot. Looks like you were really thorough.
I have one. When you name an area with grid, do you have to use the letter A, B, C, or can you name them anything?
Yeah, you can name them anything you want. I just used ABC because I really like it for prototyping, and actually I did mention that in the talk, but Grid is fantastic for prototyping. Even if you don't use it for your final project, it's so painless to just go and do the areas. Yeah, I just do that because it's really easy for me to do it quickly, change the areas. But you can very often name them header and content and so on, and that's really good for page layout, yes.
So if subgrid isn't a thing yet, does it mean that basically if you have these horizontal cards that take up the entire width of the page, it's not really possible to use grid to align the contents like so that it would become a sort of a table-like?
You can do that.
Okay.
So the thing is that I didn't say about is Grid also supports the justify contents and align items for Flexbox. So it definitely allows you that. And also it supports justify items and align contents, which if you've ever used Flexbox and wonder what the hell do those mean, they are for Grid. Yes, so you can do those things. The annoying part there, I think, is that if you start really caring about like the inner bits aligning with each other, there's no guarantee that that will happen. In our project, it kind of works out a lot. We don't have a use case, but in our project, it would work because our spacing is very consistent. So we only have 5 values for spacing, and then almost by a happy accident, it would happen. But yes, the proper solution is to have a subgrid so that you can actually align those inner items. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
There was already in Float a super nice comment about like loving your enthusiasm. Our sales guys could learn something from you. Like, and now, if you buy this, you'll get the grid as well.
Hey kids, want some grid? Okay.
Any remote questions? Now I'm actually looking into Float because there was one question for Ruslan. I can ask that later, but I didn't see it. But no remote questions. So I guess we're done. Thanks a lot for your cool presentation. Did you, Ruslan, notice the question? There was a question, what kind of experience have you on latency and Lambda cold start?
About the latency of the lambdas, it's actually for Node.js, it's quite fast. There's no such big of a latency when you start, so it's kind of, it starts very fast. And it actually helps to not store the static resources. So that's the idea is that Lambda is actually what it's doing. It's selecting some container in the cloud. It downloads the zip file with the files from the bucket, and after that it just starts the unpacks this and starts with Node.js like conventional way and just connects this through the event infrastructure connects it with the HTTP. So it's kind of if you consider that, so you just need to be not so much heavy weight on the resources, on the Node.js models you use. It's kind of like a basic HTTPS server after that. There's kind of actually tricks about that. It's the problem is the Node.js event loop is actually like pretty tricky. You should like if you do this server-side rendering, you should free this event loop. For example, I've made this mistake as actually, I've left this express.js listen command on the inside of the code. And after that, the node Lambda execution time of Lambda was like maximum timeout time. So you pay for timeout time, like 60 seconds by default. And it's actually you can just run out of money like immediately if you do not control that. So when I removed that, it came fine after that, but still that's kind of you should like monitor. It's actually pretty easy. You just push the messages to CloudWatch, and after that you can take a look at this. How much does it start up time? How much does it fast render? To how much time processing this request well? So you can like log all this and have this information.
Okay. Thanks. This is it. See you next week.